Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to Why You Do What You Do, a program that talks about human development and psychology, and why you do what you do. Now, yesterday we left off talking about early approaches in human development, and so we're going to take it from there. It was Charles Darwin, originator of the theory of evolution, who first emphasized the developmental nature of infant behavior. So they learned something new about Charles Darwin. He wasn't just interested in, how creatures became what they were, but how children became what they were. So let's talk about evolution. Now, don't get all fired up. Stop, drop, and roll right now before you get there. Evolution is a fact of life. You evolve from being a baby to an adult. You're still not, hopefully, laying in a bed, needing a diaper, needing a bottle, and crying when you need these things. You evolved from a baby into an adult. Just like creatures grow and adapt. And now people, who are in the religious community are like, oh, evolution, no, you can't. Okay, stop for a moment. If the creator of the universe, you hear scientists talk about intelligent design. So God is the most intelligent being in the universe. Can we agree on that? Okay. So, would the most intelligent being in the universe create creatures who could not grow and adapt and evolve in their environment? No, because that would be dumb, and God's not dumb. So evolution is a fact. We evolved, we're not still sitting in caves using rocks to, smash things and, throwing spears at, mammoths. We're not doing that anymore. Here we are in this world, in this day. So clearly we evolved from our beginnings into what we are now. And that's part of intelligent design, So the two are not exclusive of each other, God created evolution so that creatures could evolve and adapt to their environment. Otherwise, they would all die, and it would be a waste of his time. So, In 1877, Darwin published notes on his son Dottie's sensory, cognitive, and emotional development during his first 12 months. So, again, we have a poor kid who used a science experiment. His own son, and that's how, Darwin was learning what happened between the progression from this little lump of, flesh turning into a grown-up person. Darwin's journal gave baby biography scientific respectability. About 30 more were published during the next 3 decades. So people caught on to this. And like I said, most of us had a baby book, or our kids had a baby book, and you're keeping track of the milestones. So scientists figured out, hey, there is a pattern to development, and they started keeping track of it to see if it was a consistent pattern across the board for everyone. By the end of the 19th century, several important trends in the Western world were preparing the way for scientific study of development. This was a way for them to figure out how we develop, because before it was just like, nobody even really cared how you got from point A to point B, and they just figured there was a problem with you if there was a problem with you getting from point A to point B. Scientists had unlocked the mystery of conception, and as in the case of the wild boy of Aveyron, we're arguing about the relative importance of nature and nurture, inborn characteristics and experiential influences. Like we talked about yesterday, both have their place in your makeup. Nurture is how you were treated. Nature is what you were born with. The discovery of germs and immunization made it possible for many more children to survive infancy. So when we started immunizing our children, they didn't catch these deadly diseases. And when people started realizing germs were a thing, and started washing their hands and taking baths, then they were surviving a little bit longer. Laws protecting children from long work days let them spend more time in school, and parents and teachers became more concerned with identifying and meeting children's developmental needs. Back in the 1800s, your child could go work in a coal mine or something like that. There's pictures, on the internet if you want to check out the child labor pictures. It's not good. But then they missed out on their development because they weren't learning things, and they created basically a generation of ignorant people, no offense, because they weren't literate. They didn't learn anything about how the world works because they were working. The new science of psychology taught that people could understand themselves by learning what had influenced them as children. And that's why we're here, to help you to learn what influenced you as a child, so you'll know why you do what you do. Still, this new discipline had far to go, because they were just now figuring out that there was a consistent way of developing, and that children needed to develop, in order to have intelligence and well-adjustment in the world. For example, adolescence was not considered a separate period of development until the early 20th century, when G. Stanley Hall, a pioneer in child study, published a popular, though unscientific book called Adolescence. So adolescence before was just considered part of childhood, or a gray area between childhood and adulthood. And, even prior to this time, once a girl started menses, or a boy started, they were then considered young adults. I mean, prior to this, there were girls, 12 to 14 being married off. And that's a shame, because they were still not fully developed. Their brains weren't developed fully. Their bodies weren't developed fully. And their growth was stunted by, engaging in adult acts and having children at such a young age. Hall also was one of the first psychologists to become interested in aging. So that's something that people just took for granted, never studied. You're getting old. It's a fact. You're going to get old. You're going to die. Who cares? In 1922, at age 78, he published Sentience, the Last Half of Life. So this was a thing that he wrote, based on his experiences in his last half of life. And of course, he was 78. I don't know when he died. But, this is his things that he experienced. 6 years later, Stanford University opened the first major scientific research unit devoted to aging. So, this spurred a major university to study aging. Whereas before, like I said, they might have studied medicine and, things and, medication, things of this nature. But, now we're looking at aging, which is part of your development. You might not think so, but you're developing from the time you form in the womb to the time that you pass into another dimension. But not until a generation later did the study of aging blossom. So, at that time, it wasn't something that interesting. But then later on, they started studying it. And that's when the fields of geriatrics, and studying about dementia, Alzheimer's, and things like that started happening. Because, before it was just basically, well, you're going to get old, you're going to get dumb, and you're going to die, Facts of life. Since the late 1930s, a number of important long-term studies discussed the second half of his book, such as those important long-term studies of K. Warner Shea, George Vaillant, Daniel Levinson, and Ravina Helson, have focused on intelligence and personality development in adulthood and old age. Because things that happen in old age, such as dementia, Alzheimer's, can affect your behavior, as we know. We have a family member that has dementia and has been having persecution delusions, so the behavior has changed and gotten really uncomfortable for most everybody, including that person. Studying the lifespan. Today, most developmental scientists recognize that development goes on throughout life. Like I said, your whole entire life, from the time you're, conceived to the time you pass away. This concept of a lifelong process of development that can be studied scientifically is known as lifespan development. Because hopefully you are developing throughout your entire life. Hopefully you are learning and growing and evolving as a person throughout your entire life. Lifespan studies in the United States grew out of research designed to follow children through adulthood. Excuse me. And again, they were looking to study development, how we develop from being a child to being an adult. Excuse me. The Stanford studies of gifted children, begun in 1921 under the direction of Louis M. Terman, trace the development of people now in old age who are identified as unusually intelligent in childhood. So even then, they understood that there are some people who do better than others. They're, a lot more smart or intelligent than their peers. So they want to start looking into this. It's like, why is that? Is there just a scientific reason, or is there a nurture reason? Other major studies that began around 1930, the Fels Research Institute study, the Berkeley Growth and Guidance Studies, and the Oakland Adolescent Growth Study, have given us much information on long-term development. And why do we need to know this? To take better care of our children, to give them a better life, to make sure their nature is taken care of through, medication, preventive health maintenance, and making sure their spiritual, mental, emotional, physical needs are met. And the nurture, to make sure that they understand that they are good, they are smart enough to do whatever they need to do, they are a loving person and a decent person. Because that's what you should be teaching your children. If you're teaching them something other than that, you're in the wrong. Because human beings are complex, the study of lifespan development is interdisciplinary, drawing on many fields or disciplines. So, everything in your life can be a field. If you just think about all the different fields of study there are in the world, you start out with a pediatrician. If there's any problems, you end up with this specialist, or, a podiatrist, or, an optometrist. There are different things that you go to. So there are different levels of study throughout your life that someone can be looking at and say, why is this? And what can we do about this? These include psychology, which we're talking about now, psychiatry, which basically is psychology with some meds thrown in. There's an MD there too, so they're specialized. Sociology, which is the study of society. I have a few degrees in that. Anthropology, which is the study of human beings. Biology, which is the study of, science is biology, what makes up a living organism. Genetics, the study of inherited characteristics. Family science, the study of family processes. Yes, that is a study. Family dynamics. Education, history, philosophy, and medicine, of course. This book reports on classic and current research in these fields, and we're not even really worried about what it has to say. We're delving into the studies. Human development today. As the field of human development became a scientific discipline, its goals evolved to include description, describing, what you're observing, explanation, giving an explanation, and some of these were just best guesses, prediction, predicting what's going to happen in the study, and modification of behavior. Let's face it, sometimes, when you're doing a study, you need to modify this, that, or the other thing, and some people need behavior modification too. Just putting that out there. These 4 goals work together, as we can see, by looking at language development. Because as a baby, you're not making any noise other than crying. But then as your parents talk to you, you start making like vowel sounds, like ah, eh, and then you can start putting consonant sounds off top of this. Ma, da, So it's a process, and it's trial and error. A baby might spit out some crazy thing, and you're like, what are you saying? And they'll laugh and giggle about it because, they really don't know. But it's a process. For example, to describe when most normal children say their first word or how large their vocabulary typically is at a certain age, developmental scientists observe large groups of children and establish norms or averages for behavior at various stages. And in psychology, one of the things they teach you is that there's no such thing as normal. There are averages, the law of averages. Most people fall at a certain level. Some people can fall to the left or to the right of that. It's a law of averages. They then attempt to explain what causes or influences the observed behavior. For example, how children acquire and learn to use language, and why a child like Victor, who may have lacked early exposure to language, did not learn to speak. This was a good study for people who want their child to learn to speak if they're having problems and they're a little slower at it. One of my children had Asperger's, and so he was not speaking until he was 2 years old. And that's the reason why I talked to the doctor about it. And they gave me some bad advice, which, I didn't listen to, thank goodness, because he turned out, fine. He's the most social person, in the bunch. So, and they can, also by learning this, help, deaf children or children, who have been neglected and abused and who need such interventions, speech therapy, things of that nature. This knowledge may make it possible to predict what language ability at a given age can tell about later behavior. For example, about the likelihood that a child with delayed language development might still be taught to speak, because some children have that. There are different reasons. Like I said, it might be, their natural way, or it might be due to abuse and neglect. They weren't taught properly. They weren't exposed to speaking. They were just kind of shoved off to the side and not interacted with. That's unfortunate, but it does happen. Finally, awareness of how language develops may be used to modify behavior, as it's hard attempted to do in tutoring Victor. So in knowing how this thing works, you can try and replicate that in someone where it's not working so well. And that's why when you go to the pediatrician, they say, are they doing this yet? Are they doing this yet? Are they doing this? Because they're ticking off the boxes. They want to know if your child is developing in the average way or not. The scientific study of human development is an ever-evolving endeavor. And it will be. Like I said, we're always learning until the day we die. So science is always going to be learning until the day the Lord rolls up the universe like a scroll. The questions that developmental scientists seek to answer, the methods they use, and the explanations they propose are not the same today as they were 25 years ago. And that's true. If you ever, when I was pregnant, my mother gave me her maternity books. And they were so outdated compared to mine, and I thanked her for them, but a lot of the stuff was not advisable nowadays, but that's what they thought was advisable back then. So we're always learning and growing, even in science. These shifts reflect progress and understanding as new investigations build on or challenge earlier ones. And then That's something that a lot of people have a problem with. They get stuck in their ways. Oh, this is the way my mom did it, my grandma did it, or they don't want to hear anything new. And that's just ignorance. They're scared of anything new. Science does move on. And person's knowledge moves on. So, to not expect that, it's just ignorance. Sorry. They also reflect advances in technology and changes in cultural attitudes, because technology is updating all the time, and cultural attitudes can change. We can look at that here in America. There was a America where there was tolerance and acceptance, and then all of a sudden that flipped on its heel, and now we have a lot of racism and sexism in America, and I'm not going to get into the reasons for that, but we've gone back a little bit from evolving. Sensitive instruments that measure eye movements, heart rate, blood pressure, muscle tensions, and the like are turning up intriguing connections between biological functions and infant visual attentiveness and childhood intelligence. Because infants learn through their senses. They start out trying to grasp things and then mouthing everything, and then listening and looking. And there's actually, in one study, an error the children will make where they take something and they hide it in a certain place. And then they'll move the thing to another place. And then they let the kid come look for it. And the kid at a certain age will pick the wrong place where he first saw them put it, instead of the second place where they moved it to. So that's an error in here, but it's based on, here. They first saw it go there. So they think it's still there. So, that's how children learn, and trial and error. Cameras, video cassette recorders, and computers allow investigators to scan infants' facial expressions for early signs of emotions and to analyze how mothers and babies communicate. Because mothers and babies do communicate. We learn our baby's language, We know what cry means they're hungry, what cry means they're wet or uncomfortable, or what cry is just like, I'm exhausted, I've had it, I need a nap, We learn these things. We know how to speak the baby's language if we are paying attention and being interactive with the baby. There are people, like I said, who neglect and abuse their children. There's no language there. They don't try to communicate with the child. They don't care if the child is trying to communicate with them, and that's sad. But it does happen. And that's why doctors want to see how the interaction is. Advances in neuroscience and brain imaging now make it possible to probe the mysteries of temperament, to pinpoint the sources of logical thought, and to compare a normally aging brain with the brain of a person with dementia. And temperament can be nature and nurture. We are born with a certain temperament, but again, nurture can calm that down or exacerbate it. Depends on what is going on in the home. And logical thought. There are different opinions on that, but most people agree between the age of like 21, 23, logical thought starts happening. You can think about things logically, and reason them out in your head. And some people, unfortunately, never get to that point in their lives, but that is something that you need to strive for. You need to stop, think, logic it out till what the logical conclusion of a thing would be. Again, a normal brain versus the person of a brain with dementia. And I know from experience that a person with dementia is confused. They get things wrong and backwards in their mind, and it's confusing for the people around them because they're like, how did you get from this thing over here to this thing? It's like we started at point A and we ended up at point Z instead of point B. You know, you got it totally flipped around. You know, it's a wonder that this happens, you know, in a person's brain. Increasingly, research findings have a direct application to child rearing, education, health, and social policy. So that's the most important thing in the world is child rearing, how you raise your child. That is the most important thing in the world because that is going to affect them for the rest of their life. Education. Also, the better education a person gets, the more opportunities that opens up for them in the real world when they become an adult. Health, again, if you take care of your health, your body's going to last longer. That's just a fact. You know, just like if you had some cheese, leave it out on the counter, it's going to get old and stale and moldy and crumble. And, you know, if you put it in the fridge, it's going to last a lot longer. So if you take care of your body, it's not going to age fast and fall apart and, you know, become diseased. It's going to last you longer. And social policy. Unfortunately, that has become a very political thing here in America. But personally, you know, all children have these rights to be raised in a safe home, to get an education, to take care of themselves. And I think that's a dang shame when you have political parties dictating how this will work for this group or that group. Because everyone should have the equal rights under the law to these things, not just a certain privileged bunch of people. For example, learning about childhood memory has helped determine the weight to be given children's courtroom testimony, because children are easily influenced. And this is one of the things I studied when I was studying about child abuse and assault. Children are easily intimidated. So if an adult is down in their face telling them what they saw or what they experienced, some children will give in and say, no, that never I didn't know, I just lied. When that's not the truth. They told the truth the first time, but the adult, you know, being down in their face has talked them out of this thing because they are children and they're scared. So they're not reliable witnesses under a certain age. Identifying factors that increase the risks of antisocial behavior has suggested ways to prevent it. And we've all seen those kids definitely out there beating on other people, beating on their parents, you know, screaming, definitely being antisocial. And by studying the ways that happens, and there are some nature incidences that can make that happen, but I'm going to tell you now, most of it has to do with nurture. Excuse me. Children learn what they live. So, again, but when the child starts exhibiting these things, there are interventions that they can take to help this child become a more functioning member of society. Understanding how children think about death has enabled professionals to help them deal with bereavement. And I've heard children say strange things about death. When I was working at a daycare, just people, y'all need to explain this to your child. The doggy did not lay down, and then you plant the doggy in the ground and a new puppy comes. That does not happen. The goldfish doesn't get flushed, and then, you know, the goldfish fairy doesn't bring a new one. You need to explain this to them. You know, that death happens, and it happens to every living thing. Every living thing is going to die. You don't have to be morose about it and make them feel like, what's the point? You know, but you can explain it to them that it's sad, but it happens, you know. And we can remember them in a good, fond way, but we have to go on with our life and live, because that's what they would want. You know, you can explain it in a good way. An understanding of adult development, too, has practical implications. So when we study adult development, and you might not think adults develop, is that news to you? I don't know. But they do. Like I said, from the time of you're 18 to the time you pass away, you're always learning and growing. Hopefully, hopefully you're not one of those stagnant, ignorant people that knows everything by the time they're 18 and they don't need to learn nothing more. Because then you won't. It can help people deal with life's transitions. A woman returning to work after maternity leave, a person making a career change or about to retire, a widow or widower dealing with loss, someone coping with a terminal illness. And all these things are, life transitions. If you've been spending, the past month and a half taking care of your baby, that's what you're used to, and that's, it's hard. I know after maternity leave and having to go back to work, that's hard. I don't want to leave my baby with someone else. Even though it was my mom, I don't want to leave my baby with someone else. That's my baby. I don't want other people to take care of my baby. So that's hard. If you're making a career change, that's hard. I've done that a couple of times. And it's scary, but if it's what you want, you have to take that leap of faith and go out there and do it. Or you'll be stuck where you don't want to be. And again, retirement, I've already kind of made that transition. Husband's getting ready to make that transition. I can't wait till he does. My goodness, I'm tired of him leaving and going away. But, that can be a big transition for some people. And some people retired and then gone back because they didn't like it. But it's all about what you do in your retirement. If you make yourself happy, or if you're just sitting there watching TV and bored out of your gourd, it's kind of up to you what retirement looks like. A widow or widower dealing with loss. Again, if you've had this partner in your life for, any amount of time, and then suddenly they're gone, and you know that you're never going to see them alive again until, you meet in heaven, that is a hard thing. That is hard. And, it's going to take a while. Give yourself the time you need. Give yourself the space you need. It's going to take a while. And coping with a terminal illness. I am in remission from myelofibrosis. At one point, my cell size was like up to 24. Now it's down to 10, which is considered within average, normal range. So I know that the fear of death, when you're having a terminal illness, is like, am I going to live to see my children grow? Am I going to live to see my grandchildren? Am I going to live, to do what I want to do? So that is a major stressor in your life, because you have to rush, and many times I've been told slow down, because you feel like you have to rush to get things done because you don't know how much time you have. So this is how we've learned about development, and hopefully it has shed a little more light on why you do what you do. That's all for now. Until next time. Yeah, it's